This story took place one day when I was home alone at night because my parents had gone out to grab some things for our house at one of those stores that runs until midnight. After my parents had left, I started watching some TV and eating the rest of what was left for dinner from earlier. Once I got really engrossed in the show, I completely forgot what was going on in the real world, so I was startled when I heard the knock of a door. Thinking that it was my parents who might have decided to come home early, I went and looked through the peephole. What I saw, instead of my parents, was a man in his late 50s, maybe even early 60s. Now, I decided that I was just going to be brave, so I called through the door and asked him if I could help him. My voice is always a bit shaky when answering the door, or even if I'm answering the phone, so the man must have known I was a bit scared. He claimed that his phone had died and his wife would be very worried if he didn't call back, and if he could use my phone for just a second. There was a part of me that wanted to run and hide, but I decided to act brave and pretend someone other than me was home. I called out to my dad, who of course wasn't even home, and said, "My dad will take care of that for you, sir." He hastily said, "Never mind, I don't want to trouble you guys any further than I already have. I think I have about 2% on my phone, I'll just make the call myself." My heart was racing, but once again I pretended to call to my mom and told her he didn't need the phone after all. After he left, I made sure the doors were locked as tightly as possible and sat down to finish my show. Not even 10 minutes later, there was another knock at the door this time, and I was sure it was my parents, so I ran towards the door, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw an old woman around the same age as the man. Now I thought it might have just been someone in my building my mom knew, and so I called out and asked if she needed help. After a short pause, the woman claimed that she had hurt her knee and she wanted to come in to get some ice. That's when I felt chills run down my body and knew for sure I wasn't going to let her in. Some of you might think I was overreacting, but something just seemed really off, and so I told her I was going to call the cops. She screamed that I was a rude, ungrateful bitch and that they would be angry if they found out that I didn't open the door to a sweet old lady like her. After the lady had left, I heard a car start up and take off at a relatively fast speed. So to all of you, please be careful who you open the door for, and question all the sympathetic stories that they tell. I just want to start off with a bit of background information. At the time of this encounter, I was 14 and I am now 18, and this still freaks me out when I talk about it. So I live with my mom, dad, brother, and dog, which is a border collie. My house is supposed to be 2 flats, but we bought both and turned it into a house so it has 2 doors that can easily be accessed, as we used the back door so we could let my dog out into the garden. It was a late night in December of 2011. My brother Tom and I were home alone as my mom and dad were both going out at a friend's Christmas party. Being an obnoxious teen, I refused to go out because I thought it would be really boring. Me and Tom were upstairs in my house playing the PS3 like usual, and it got around to about 9 p.m. and I heard something fall downstairs. We normally lock my dog in the back room. With this night, there was no exception. Thinking that it was just my dog, I brushed it off as nothing. That was until I heard my dog growl. I've never heard him growl as loud as he did that night. This sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I got up and walked to the top of the stairs to see if I could see anything. As soon as I got to the top, I instantly froze. My front door was wide open. I stood there. I just couldn't move even if I wanted to. This is when it got even creepier. I was about ready to run and call the police when a man in full black gear walked into my house and immediately stared at me. It felt like an eternity. Me, a 14-year-old boy, standing inches away from a 6-foot guy inside my house, just staring at each other. That's when he began to talk. He tried to engage in a friendly conversation. It went on the lines of this. The man said, "Hi, is this your house?" Me, "Yes." Him, "I like your dog. He seems nice." Me, "Thank you." Him, "Where are your parents?" I didn't reply. Him, "So what I want you to do is go in the bathroom and lock the door." Me, "Why?" As he was about to say something, I heard sirens coming up on the street. The man hesitated and then proceeded to run out the door. But before that, he looked back at me and said, "You didn't see anything. Got that?" I nodded my head and then he just ran away. Moments later, the police came running through my door and immediately began to ask questions, like if it was alright and is the man still there. I just couldn't speak. I was so shocked of what happened. I was so shocked at what had just happened in the space of a few minutes. I later that night found out that a man who was waiting at the bus stop outside of my house had spotted the man enter my house multiple times. He contacted the police about this until he just stood at my door, that is. That's when the man knew that something was off and ushered the police to arrive soon. They never caught the man who did this, and from my encounter with him, all I could tell the detectives was that he was a fairly large and spoke in extremely deep tone. The man never stole anything from my living room. It just leaves questions on what he was actually looking for. It's fair to say that my parents vowed to never leave the house without us again. The thing that still haunts me is, what if I never got up to look around? He could have easily just walked up the stairs and straight into my room. Nothing else has ever happened. I, nor anyone in our neighborhood, has ever seen that man again. This happened when I was in my mid-20s. At the time, I was living with a boyfriend, and the area of town we lived in was a rougher working class. But only once was I ever truly scared to be where I was. So at the time, I was unemployed, but my boyfriend wasn't. He'd get up and go to work at around 8:30 in the morning, and I'd sleep for another hour, get up, and then start looking for work online. So one morning, things progress as usual. Boyfriend gets up, gets dressed, kisses me goodbye, and goes to work, and I go back to sleep. Only this time I was woken up literally 10 minutes later by someone knocking on our door. Now, we had no friends in the area and weren't expecting anyone. I got up out of bed and for some reason, make sure to walk quietly to the door. I look through the people and see a guy I didn't recognize wearing a tan trench coat. I don't know why, but something about this guy freaked me out. My instincts told me not to open the door, and he knocked again. That's when I decided that whatever he wants, if he really wants it that bad, he can come back when my boyfriend is home. I sneak away from the door and didn't want him to hear my footsteps. That's when he tried to open the door. I can hear him gently teasing the knob. Fortunately, my boyfriend locked the door on his way to work, and the creeper couldn't get in. I was freaked out by now. Random guy knocking on the door is one thing, but now he's actively trying to break in. I was ready to call the cops, but the locked door was enough of an obstacle for him that he just gave up and went away. I didn't leave the apartment at all that day. Fortunately, the guy never came back. So tan coat creeper who once tried to break into my apartment, let's not meet ever again. This experience happened to me in the summer of July 2015. To give some background to the story, I live in a small town in California just 20 miles from the coast, and it is considered one of the safest and friendliest towns in the state. Crime is usually rare, besides the usual teens getting caught smoking weed or drinking alcohol. But what I experienced that night was an experience that I would never forget. I am a 17-year-old male, recently graduated high school and soon to be going into college. Because it was summer, I finally had the rare chance and freedom to do whatever I wanted all day without worrying about schoolwork. And I also had the freedom to stay up all night if I wanted to. Anyways, one day my parents told me that they were going to leave the house in the morning and not come back until the next day, meaning I had the house to myself all day and all night. My mom was getting surgery and was staying overnight, and my dad decided to stay with her in the hospital. I was pretty excited that I had the house to myself for 24 hours, because I never did before. But what happened made me wish my parents were there. As usual, all I did was watch TV, play video games, and be unproductive all day. Basically my summer experience. That is until night rolled around. I was still playing Xbox until around 11 p.m. when things got weird. Now to give you a few more backgrounds, my family has 2 indoor cats. Both are extremely friendly cats, until something happens outside. Whenever there's a bird, raccoon, person, or anything really, they get excited and their feline instincts kick in. They immediately rush to the window and start meowing and growling. They growl especially if someone is at the door. All this information will be relevant for later. So back to the story. It was close to 11 at night and I was still on my ass playing Call of Duty. The noise volume was fairly low, so suddenly I heard a few taps coming from the general front door area. Like light footsteps and small scrapes. My cat suddenly bolted from the other room in my house. I paused the game and looked over, and saw my cats were walking around excitedly with their tails pointed up and their ears perched. Although my hair stood up as well, I simply dismissed the noise as a rat or raccoon either on the front yard or the roof, because we have so many and I hear them all the time, especially at night. Also, I was too engaged in my game to know specifically where the sounds came from, so I just assumed the roof. A few seconds later, I returned to my game. Although my cats were still clearly nervous and excited, I almost forgot about the sound until a few minutes later when I heard it again. This time it was louder, now sounding more like hard shuffling across the stone-paved front yard from the front door area. My cats quickly sprinted to the window that overlooks the yard and started to meow excitedly and occasionally hiss. This time I knew something was definitely there. I paused my game again and went over to the window where my cats were at to see what was out there. I expected a deer or a coyote since rats cannot make that type of sound, and the noise only came from the outside door, not the roof. I peered out but saw nothing since it was very dark. I was a bit more creeped out. I decided not to play any more Xbox since my hairs were standing up and shivers were spreading throughout my whole entire body. Now, being 6'4" and weighing 200 pounds, I felt like a dumbass and a wuss for being afraid of a deer. I decided to go brush my teeth and go to bed. Before I went into the bathroom, that's when I was just standing there thinking all this crazy shit happened. I decided I would brush my teeth and go to bed. Before I went into the bathroom was when I was just standing there thinking all of this crazy shit happened. My cats heard it before me. Both of them ran to the front door, one of them growling like I've never heard it before. A split second later I heard it, heavy, shuffling footsteps right outside the door, and then another split second, the automatic lighting from the front porch turned on. Now this time I knew it was a person for sure. Only a human can make obvious footsteps like that, and the automatic lighting only turns on for big objects, like people. There was no knock or doorbell ring, but the front door is loose on its hinges, and if you slightly push it or nudge it, the door rattles. That is exactly what happened, and the rattle terrified me to the bone. Just knowing that I was home alone, in the dark except for my TV screen, with footsteps and the automatic lighting turning on outside, gave me a feeling of terror that I would never forget. At this point, my cats were going absolutely crazy, meowing, hissing, growling like crazy, although every single muscle in my body told me to get away. Curiosity that people get to look into terror. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly snuck to the door. If you enter my house, you would enter the mudroom, which is just a closet and a place to put shoes, and then would have to turn right to a former doorway to enter the living room, where I was. Also, my door is not a fully wooden door like most people have, but instead, a decorative glass in the place where the panel should be. Anyways, I snuck up to the mudroom and peered around the empty doorway to indeed see through the glass a figure of a person standing there. I cleared my throat and mustered up the courage to ask, "Who's this?" No answer. Now I asked, "Who are you?" The figure bent down and cupped his hands to his face and peered through the decorative glass. The terror swept me again, with my throat tightening and shivers spreading throughout my body. Because I was in such shock, I hardly remember the facial features of the person except that he was thin-faced African-American man. We stared at each other for another few seconds. His expression turned into a scowl, like disappointment that I was home. And in a second, the guy was gone. I could hear the fast-paced footsteps of shoes against the stone as the guy ran off. About 15 seconds later, I heard a vehicle turn on and screech of tires as he drove off. My terror soon turned into warm, sweet relief as I knew this man was gone. My cats finally stopped acting so crazy and just, like two cute little kittens, forgot about it, walked to whatever corner of the house, lied down and started snoozing like nothing had ever happened. I called my dad immediately, and when it was ringing, I thought I should tell him what had happened. I thought of what I should tell him. When he picked up, I hesitated on telling him what had happened. I don't know why. Maybe it was just because I didn't want him to deal with a house burglar and police while still having to deal with my mom, just waking up from surgery and in pain. So I didn't tell him, and never told him or my mom what I experienced that night. I didn't want my parents to worry, especially because they were on the more overprotective side. My theory on who this guy was and what he was doing was that he was scouting our neighborhood and looking for empty driveways so that he could somehow break into houses. Since our car was gone and I was home alone, he probably thought that there was nobody home. I'm guessing the shuffling and light footsteps the first 2 times when I thought it was just a rat or a deer was him hesitating or something, and on the 3rd time, he found the courage to look through the glass panel. Finally, when he heard me, he became curious and looked through the glass. However, when he saw me, he figured that he couldn't rob the place because I was there, so he bolted and drove away. Again, this is just my theory. I really have no idea what this guy was up to. The important thing is, that I have never seen or heard from this guy again, and I'm relieved that he hopefully will never visit our house again. Actually, now that I think about it, I wish he would come back. I'll be waiting with a baseball bat to show him who the fuck he's messing with. I'm still angry at myself that I reacted in such fear and terror, and I promise that I would react differently if it would happen again. In conclusion, let's never meet again.